living in the gain allows you to assuage a lot of your anxiety and fear, right? Because you've proven to yourself that you've come a long way, whether it be personally, professionally, whatever. And that, as it turns out, will actually benefit you moving forward. What's up, Matt? 2 weeks in a row.
2 weeks. I'm on fire, man.
You are. Taking your, if you guys really want to know, we're just shooting 3 podcasts back to back. So if you see us in the same clothes, could be that we're sleeping in our offices because we're busy. Could be that we're shooting 3 in a row. I don't know.
I mean, I probably have the same clothes on every podcast. I only think I wear 5 different things.
Matt doesn't care about his clothing. Jared and I are like a couple of ladies comparing our pants and stuff every day. Matt laughs at us.
Where did you get those?
Yeah. I love those pants. They make your butt look good.
We have a really strong culture of we got hard shoe game in here.
We do have some hard shoe game. We got 3 guys that are in the corporate office every day that are buying every imaginable Jordan that you can think of, and Matt's just like, what is wrong with you people? But on the flip side, we have to order clothes for Matt from the Alloy site. So I'm like, dude, that has a hole in it, that shirt. He's like, does it? I've been sleeping in it for a week. So Matt's all about the result. He don't give a crap.
How many dinners have we gone to? Or literally, I think the whole wardrobe I have is probably all clothes that you passed out.
Yeah. So when I used to travel a bunch, I was about maybe 200 pounds. Now I'm like 220. Now I'm like jacked.
Biggest CEO ever, right?
That's right. That's it. And the most yoked CEO, goals, #goals. So that being said, a lot of my really nice clothes, I can't wear them anymore. And so I give them to Matt, who's about my size, but just, he's where I was maybe a couple of years ago. He'll get there. And he looks great. So he'll come out to dinner and he's like, the only thing I'm not wearing that didn't belong to you at one point is my underwear. And I can change that as well. I've got a lot of underwear I've outgrown.
Well, yeah. You just keep bulking up.
Yeah.
Just keep getting bigger, buddy.
I will. I'll do that. So do you have a dad joke for us today? We're going to stay with dad jokes for this year, I think.
Yeah, I mean, why not?
Let's do it.
So why couldn't the bicycle stand up on its own?
I don't know.
It was too tired.
Oh, nice. Nice. Matt's always so clean. You can tell he's got 3 little girls. He tells these jokes. He's like, but mine are as well this year. We're turning over a new leaf.
I was about to say, you dropping a dirty one, start the year?
Yeah, I would love to, but I can't. I'm not going to do that. I've got some. But so did you know that Teslas don't have the new car smell?
No.
They have an Elon Musk.
Very good.
See?
Did you see the Elon Musk? Maybe you sent it to me where he went off on advertising.
Yeah. That was great. I don't know why I liked it because, at the end of the day, I could see both sides of it. He runs a business, but I think in today's #journalism, which isn't that, it's just a game of gotchas and salacious headlines. He was the guy interviewing him was trying to get him with a gotcha. And he basically said, I don't care. And then he said, if you don't want to advertise here, go F yourself. And he's like, seriously, go F yourself. It got a lot of press and a lot of people loved it. You just love to see a guy at least take a stand and not kowtow to every, massive private equity company that's telling you what you can and can't do. Same thing happened with Peloton, which poor Peloton, they can't catch a break these days. And I'm not an anti-Peloton guy. Like if people get moving and they weren't before, I don't care what the mechanism is. I think it's great. Right? It's a tool, period. But there was a podcast that had Theo Vaughn on it and Dana White. And Theo Vaughn was saying, yeah, man, in this cancel culture, you got to be careful. And Dana White's like, and he's probably the quintessential, I don't give a flip, guy.
Right.
And Theo Vaughn said, yeah, we had a sponsor tell us to take a podcast down that I did with RFK. And RFK is Democratic, but whatever. You can say what you want about his politics, but he has sort of an anti-vaccine message, which is still like a big no-no. And so Peloton came out and said, hey, take this thing down. And Dana White's on his podcast saying, well, who was it? Which CEO? And Theo Vaughn's like, I don't remember. Dana White's like, I don't believe you. And then someone on Theo's team says, oh, it was Peloton. And man, they went off. So Theo Vaughn's a comedian, so he's making jokes about Peloton, and then Dana White's calling his guy over and saying, do we have any of those here in the UFC gyms? Take them all out. And then it went into like them throwing them in the dumpster. And it was just like, oh man. Poor Peloton, and they've taken a beating over the last few years.
Too much.
They bring up literally a picture of the CEO, and he's like, of course that's the CEO. Look at him. And they're like almost like bullying him, which I didn't love, but it's like this poor pencil neck guy, and they're like, where does he live? And they're like, I bet you it's San Francisco. And they pull over like, yep, look at that. Of course, and then that poor Peloton. So I don't know, man. In this day and age,
it's crazy.
It can get weird. But Elon Musk's was pretty good. And he even addressed the CEO, I think, of Disney, who was in the crowd. I think his name was Bob or something like that. He's like, I don't know, Bob, I'm pretty sure you're here. Are you out there? Go fuck yourself. I was like, damn. Like, it's that, and that stuff these days, man, anything that gets people riled up, it sells. Big time.
Yeah. Okay.
It sells for sure.
But that goes into what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, it actually really does. And so on our last podcast, we did a recap of the year, and we kind of joked a little bit on that podcast because we knew this was coming. And what we're going to talk about today, it's based on a book written by Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy. They wrote Who Not How, as an example, which I really liked. And they released a book called The Gap and the Gain, right? And The Gap and the Gain is really a framework for how you think about success or not, right? Or how you measure success, I should say. It's an easier way to say it. And it was interesting. I found it fascinating. Now, a lot of people that read it were like, duh, it's so on the nose that there's no revelations here whatsoever. And I read a lot of business books, and I would agree. A lot of them are just sort of saying the same things in different ways.
Sure.
For whatever reason, this book, and of course you know why I'm at, but this book really spoke to me. And the basic idea is this, that, you're either living in what they call the gain or the gap. And the gap is, a basic example would be that you're basing your success on the future. And as we know, we're never where we want to be.
Yep.
Right? So if we're sitting at 400 licenses at the end of next year, it wasn't good enough. We should have been at 500. And we're always like, well, so, we did the duties and the task and the actions. Of course we're at that, right? You expect it because you worked hard to get it. And then also by that point, the goalpost has moved, right? So the gap between where you are and where you want to be is what they call the gap. That's how they define it. And in that gap lives a lot of anxiety, a lot of like self-doubt, a lot of criticism, self-criticism, right? Or criticism of your team or whatever that may be. And it can work. I've always thought that it would work for me. And I think you're wired the same way. And we laughed about this. And I gave you the book. I'm like, man, you need to read this. You need to read this. And I gave it to a couple of franchisees who are wired the same way because it's easy to think that if you are satisfied with where you are in any way, shape, or form, it will somehow prohibit you from pushing to get to the next level.
Yeah.
And I thought there was maybe some real science there. Like, okay, if we're always walking around with this Pollyanna attitude about how great everything is, how are we ever going to have the grit and the gumption to push forward to the next thing, right? Because if we're super happy with where we are, we won't push forward. Now, so that's the gap. The gap is you're here. There's a place you want to be. And in that gap is where you live. And the problem with that is, through the lens of this book, is that you tell yourself, when we get to blank, I will be blank. So when we get to 400, I will then be successful as a definition, or I will be, and sometimes it's a personal thing in your life. When I get to here, when I lose this much weight, I will be happy. I will feel content, whatever those things are. And so we all know that that's not true. How many of us have chased a huge goal, met it, only to be like, meh, right?
Well, that's because we were supposed to do it.
There goes Matt, living in the gap. But I do this to a fault. I really do. And we notoriously have joked, and maybe it would be ill-advised to think of things the way that we have, which is, we're never satisfied. We don't celebrate any wins at all, ever, because we're just like, hey, if we celebrate wins, there's a fear there, which you could say just the fear itself is living in the gap, right? There's a fear that if we celebrate where we are, it will somehow, again, rob us of the motivation to push to the next level.
Yeah.
Now, in the book, they talk about you're either living in there or you're living in what they call the gain. And the gain is measuring progress by looking backwards, not forwards. And so if you looked at the gap as where you are now and where you want to be, and you're going to have some desired outcome when you reach this juncture, we know that you're probably not, right? Now, the gain is the opposite. So it's like you look at where you are now and you measure back to where you were.
Right, how far you've came.
How far you've come, yep. And here's what's interesting to me, the real psychology, the science, the real hard science, right? Because I'm not real feely, right? As you guys might have surmised, I like data, and I like to make rational, logical decisions. I don't like to go based on feels. I don't think your gut's trustworthy unless you're somebody who's done something for a long time. Then it's not really your gut. You're just amassing a lot of information, and you're basing it on a lens of lots of information, and you call it your gut. It's not your gut. If you're 24, your gut's terrible. It doesn't know anything. I mean, your frontal lobe's not even developed. Like, don't trust your gut. Look at your data, right? But living in the gain is saying, okay, I'm here now. Look how far I've come. And as it turns out, the real science and the psychology would show that will actually benefit you to then close the gap, which I thought it would have been the exact opposite. I would have argued that with zero basis other than my own personal experience and my gut, which as it turns out wasn't that great either. I would say that no, you cannot do that. You cannot celebrate wins. I always championed Elon Musk when he became wealthiest man in the world, and he tweeted, isn't that interesting, ... Now back to work, right?
Right.
But I think, and I know now based on psychology, if you look back and you say, okay, a year ago I was here, now I am here, and that can mean a lot of things. Look how far I've come. That will actually benefit you. It's almost like the self-efficacy to be able to push forward and close the gap, right? And there's no closing the gap. There's always a gap. The thing is, there's always another thing you want to be,
right?
Another place you want to be, or another mountain to climb, right? And so living in the gain allows you to assuage a lot of your anxiety and fear, right? Because you've proven to yourself that you've come a long way, whether it be personally, professionally, whatever. And that, as it turns out, will actually benefit you moving forward, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the power of positivity, right? It's like your outlook on everything is entirely different, right? Versus you living in the gap and you're stressed out because you're never where you want to be.
Right. And so imagine approaching your day. Imagine approaching the hour, which is the day, which is the weeks, which is months, years, which is basically your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Imagine approaching it with a different outlook simply because you've chosen to measure backwards to, right?
Yeah.
To where you are and saying, wow, look how far we've come. I think if you do that, it will tell you, I am a person that can do blank, hard things, make good decisions. I can grow. I can learn. I've had to, which means, okay, I've been living in the gap. And by the way, this isn't like flipping a switch and then you're always living in the gain. I mean, this happens even to Dan Sullivan, who's a business coach. He's an older man in his late 70s. And he'll tell you that every day he is in the gap at some point.
Sure.
It's a conscious decision to not stay in that headspace, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, everybody, whether it's business or personal, right? They have, or a lot, I wouldn't say everyone because I can't speak for everyone, but like most people, you would imagine they have this idea of where they should be, right? The way they should be in their life, where, how successful, business, etc. And it's hard for people if you always live in there, right? Because you never climb that mountain. And one of the things like kind of with the Elon Musk kind of remind me is like everything, online, digital media, all that stuff, what it shows you is always the gap, right? There's always somebody better than you. This business is better than you, right? And that's it's hard because everything's pushing you right kind of there, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. I mean, look, I'm listening to a podcast now. I think it's on Rogan's, but I really wanted to hear it. It's a couple of guys talking about AI, and they talked about some things that came out innocently. But what they were building was something that was based on a business model. So like if social media, and its job is to keep your attention longer, they don't care what the mechanism is, right? Like a like button, as an example, was invented, or a constant scroll, or Netflix automatically loading the next movie versus you having to choose it. All these what seem like small psychological hacks, again, they play on our brain, right? But when you create something based on a business model and you don't consider the humanity in the business model because it's just based on a thing, once the horse is out of the barn, you can't really get it back. And so what ends up happening is from the advent of the smartphones and social media is like a drastic drop in mental health, right?
Right.
Yeah, poor mental health, certainly amongst young people. And it's really just based on comparison being the thief of joy. That's it. So you feel like you're doing great. You flip open Instagram and you see a guy you went to school with who is seemingly balling out of control, and you immediately are back in the gap because you are not there. You're not driving that car. You're not living in that home. You don't have that beautiful family. Maybe you're still single. There's all these things, right? And it's created to do that to you. It really is. It's not on purpose, but that is the wicked side effect of what's been created. And so to your point, that's a fact. And you have to really consider, you have to logically look at that as all of that information is curated. All of it.
Yep.
You have no idea. I've heard Jordan Peterson saying this. You see a guy drive by you in a Porsche and or a girl, and they have a beautiful spouse in the passenger seat, and you're driving a beater and you're just getting your journey started, and you're just like, man, that guy's got it made. And what you don't know is that guy might be on SSRIs, he might be underwater in debt, and he is just 2 exits away from driving that fucking Porsche into the concrete pillars of that bridge.
Exactly.
You have no idea, right, what people are going through, and everybody has shit. That's for sure, right? So A, be aware of that, don't fall prey to it, and B, there's so much technology built into social media or whatnot, even from an aesthetic standpoint. And this is certainly, based on the studies, what young females suffer from is this sort of idealistic body image and what you look like, and it's driving crazy plastic surgeries and everything. And none of it's real. I mean, the people that you're looking at are not even real. They were speaking on this podcast. It was the 2 guys that produced Social Dilemma, a really interesting podcast or interesting movie about where we're going with social media. And they'll basically say that 80% of content in the next 3 to 5 years will not be produced by human beings. So imagine if AI is creating the content, those aren't even real people. I mean, literally, they are generated by a computer. So you have an AI avatar that you're trying to look like, be like, act like. It's not even a real person, right? So you got to be really aware of that from the comparison trap, which, again, is the thief of joy. But I think if you don't live there, because that will create a massive gap for you. As a matter of a side note on that before I forget, they were saying at this point in time, even Zoom has filters on it that you don't know. So you will actually look better on a Zoom call than you actually do. So you're looking at yourself and you look better, and then you go into the bathroom and look in the mirror and go, yeesh. What happened to that guy? Somewhere between my desk and the bathroom, I aged 47 years. Like, what the fuck? So it's
it's right on Instagram, right? There's all those filters and Snapchat. Like they're not what they look like in real life.
You don't even have to choose the filters. Like even the basic settings, if you don't do it, they already have filters on them, right? So you're looking at people's filtered lives physically. They are portraying the perfect version of themselves, right? You just can't believe any of it. So look, okay, we'll put that to bed. Fine. That's the gap. And our whole life is set up digitally right now to create a gap. And it creates angst and anxiety and displeasure and all the things, right? But if you can look at the gain, and so if you can look back to where you were, and we'll talk about a couple strategies, you're going to be much better off. And as it turns out, shame on us, like you and I, thinking, okay, if we stop to celebrate or we look at how far we've come, it will somehow work against us for pushing forward. And as it turns out, it's the exact opposite of that. So if we can live in the gain, we'll talk about it just through the lens of business, it will actually allow us to push further. And any entrepreneur listening to this, I mean, look, man, you live in a constant state of anxiety at times and that you're not enough and you run a comparison trap. Even within the franchise, we've got franchisees that are killing it. We have some that are still growing and they're looking to the ones that are killing it. And it's like, I'm sure they're like, ugh, you know what I mean? But you can't do that. Look how far you've come. You may be in month 4 and these people have been open for a year. Of course, they got a better grip on it. They've been doing it for 3 times as long.
Mm-hmm.
So if you reverse engineer, and there's ways to do this, and so I'll just give you a couple strategies that they mentioned in the book. One of them is to just look at 3 things that you did that day. Now, we have the 5-minute journal.
Yep.
Right. So we have that's basically a brand of a gratitude book. And in that is a mechanism. It's basically 3 things I'm grateful for today. What are some intentions? Like, what are my daily intentions for today? And then, at the end of the day, you wrap up and it's like, what's 3 things that I did today?
Yep.
And what's some things I could have done better? So it's like a review of your day, which everybody from the Stoics to whoever's like, review your day, right? But if you sit down at the end of every day and you look at 3 ways that you grew, it could have been a conversation that you realized that you could have said something better and you notated that and you'll do it in the future. Yep. Or you learned a new skill, or you made it to the gym when you didn't feel like it that day. And that's new for you. It's like, that's self-efficacy, right? That's going to not necessarily mean that you're not going to go to the gym in the future. Actually, it's going to lend itself to you showing up more often because you've now identified as that person, right? You've proven to yourself. So you can literally just look back and live in the daily gain. And then you can go back 3 months is what they suggest. And then really you can go back a year is a good time. Now you can go back 10 years if you want to do, there's stages of this where you do broader thinking. And so you can go back day, again, week, month, year, and then go back up to 10 years and just look. And it really helps to write these things down, like how far you come. I haven't gotten to that stage yet. It's pretty obvious. Like if I look at you, Matt, like 10 years ago, you were working here as a coach, right? And you think about what you've done in the last 10 years. And if you're that guy. So if I was like, Matt, let's talk about how far you've come in 10 years. You're already uncomfortable with me saying, I can see it on your face right now. You're just like,
And done shit yet, Rick?
Yeah, I haven't done anything. Look at where we need to be. And I think there's some merit to that, but I think the key is you can hold both thoughts at once.
Right.
You can both push to get better.
Right.
While also doing it without as much anxiety and angst. Knowing that you are a person that can grow, that can learn. You've proven it to yourself. There's self-efficacy there. Take that lens and apply it to moving forward in the future. Mm-hmm. That's the idea. And so I'm not going to explain the whole book. It's a very simple concept. They have many stories in there, which are amazing. But I just want you to hear, if you're wired like Matt and I, you're probably making a mistake ultimately. And we're going to work really hard in this next year to try to live more in the gain, because I think it will just, otherwise we'll drive each other crazy, right? It's only going to get harder from here. And if we can't look at the next phase through the lens of we're actually doing good work and we've come a long way, and that means we will continue to go a long way, it might drive us crazy. So I think it's a really good lens for us to put on. It's not going to be easy, certainly for a guy like you who's wired to be like, you want to be better every day. It's never good enough, right?
You know, it's like, obviously this kind of thought process has been around for a while. Like literally in our 7 core tenets, this is literally in there. One of the things, like looking for wins.
Dude, yeah, that's right.
And we do this with clients, right? Because they're doing the same thing, right? They're not maybe where they want to be, where they envision, but you have to constantly, show them that they are successful and show them where they started. So it's like we get it from a business side of things, but personally, I get it. It's hard, right? It's hard.
Good for you, but not for me, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Well, no, you're absolutely right, and I didn't even think about that. But so Matt's saying one of our 7 core tenets is find a win for every customer in your session every single time. It might be as simple as like, Matt's in and he's doing some push-ups, and maybe he's been a client for 5 years. And then I say to Matt, do you remember how many push-ups you did when you first came in the gym?
Couldn't even do one.
Yeah. He's like, I don't know. I don't think I could even do one. Like, you couldn't do one on your knees as a modified push-up. You just did 15 push-ups chest to the floor with perfect form. How awesome is that? And you can see that little bit of twinkle in that person's eye. Like, you know what? You're right.
Yep.
And do you think then that's going to discourage them from pushing? No. And we know the psychology. It's going to encourage them to continue to push because they're recognizing, wow, I'm someone that can stick to something. If I do the work, there will be a result. So let's just continue to do that, right?
Yep.
It's a little bit of the psychology that you and I've talked about with kids. So it's a bit of a stretch, but I think it reminds me of that, speaking of clients, where the studies have shown profoundly that if you credit your children's success to hard work as opposed to talent, they will do much better on very difficult tasks in the future, right? So if you're like, hey, son, you're so awesome at math, you're just so talented. Math's so easy for you.
Yeah.
Well, eventually, if that's the case, they're going to end up in a math class or in college in a statistics class or something that's so hard, and if they're not doing well, their propensity to quit will be much higher if they think they're run out of runway for talent. But if you've always had them living in the gain, meaning you're there because you've worked hard, and your answer will then always be to the challenge, well, I'll just work harder, which is, by the way, the exact answer that you need.
Yeah, I've used that, by the way, ever since you told me. Like, literally all my kids, like, doesn't matter what it is.
Well, I read that study a long time ago, and the other day I saw a small clip from Andrew Huberman, and he was like, this is the most profound information I've ever seen. And it was basically that study that said if you credit your children's success to hard work as opposed to their natural innate talents, and then you give them another test that's really difficult. Actually, the test they gave them was so hard that some of the things couldn't be completed. The kids that were credited with talent did markedly worse across the board than the kids that said you got here because you worked hard. So, but it's the same kind of thing. That's a way to gap and gain your kids, right? Because then if they're living in that gap, they're like, well, this person's just so much smarter than me. And
Right.
then they feel shitty, right? Whereas like, well, I didn't do as well, but that's because I didn't work hard enough.
Look how good you did based on how hard you work.
Yeah,
Right. I mean,
exactly. Yeah, you're saying, hey, this is really positive. And by the way, like when I have a challenge in the future, when I look back on how hard I've worked to get to here, I can just work that hard again and I'll get to there.
Yep.
So it's not a negative, right? And it's the opposite of like patting yourself on the back and saying, I'm amazing blindly, right? Or inaccurately. You're saying, look, I have made progress, and that's going to allow me to think of myself as a person that can make progress in the future. So it's a weird lens for entrepreneurship. We certainly struggle with it. I'm not even embarrassed that we have, because I think a lot of people do that are hard chargers and that want to win.
sure.
That's how they're wired. But the real science, you guys will tell us, it's okay to appreciate where you are, and that may actually help you push forward in the future. And you can hold both thoughts at once. And for me, it sounds like a simple concept to those of you that already get it. For me, it was pretty profound. I'm really working on that this year.
Sure. Well, I mean, for us, it's even more so important because of we're trying to grow a culture and a team, right? So like being aware of our own way we think, like it's got us up to this point. Like you've never probably not lived in the gap as much, throughout this journey, but for us to grow and expand, we have to, right?
When you think about so let's take your position. You're the point man culturally for all of our clubs once they're up and running, right?
Yep.
Once they get pre-sale. There's a lot of gap thinking when you're first becoming an entrepreneur. And so if you and your team grasp this concept, then you can coach people to look at the gain, right?
Yep.
And it's hard for us to do that because if you don't change your own thinking, you're going to project exactly the way you think onto other people. I've done that to our team. Again, a mistake.
Thanks.
Yeah, suck, man. But if you think about how you'll project that to franchisees, you could then say to someone, they're like, oh man, I'm not doing great. I'm sitting at 125 clients. I expected to be at 140. You're like, hold on, look how far you've come.
Right.
You've done this, and that. Not too dissimilar from what we would say to a client who's made some progress.
Yeah.
What's the difference? There's not. It's just business, not fitness, right?
Right.
So anyway, it's something we're going to work on. If you're a franchisee, I would encourage you to read the book. It's a very simple and short book. Again, The Gap and Gain by Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy. But yeah, I hope it helps you guys. We're going to be working on it this year, and we'll see how it goes. We'll do a mid-year update and see if if it's helped or not.
Rock on.
Nothing but positive from now on the podcast, folks.
Great job, Rick.
All right, peace.